In 2019, a shocking video was released on social media that appeared to show groups of Uyghurs hands bound, blindfolded, and head shaved, lined up and being loaded onto trains in East Turkistan, or what the Chinese call the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. Their Chinese guards are seen standing over them or herding them around. Shortly after this, disturbing reports began to surface about Chinese concentration camps where up to 1 million Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities were being held. Representatives of the Uyghur people had been trying to spread the word about human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party for many years in the East Turkistan region, abuses that have seemingly increased under Xi Jinping. Human trafficking, forced labor, forced sterilization, forced abortion, and forced removal from their lands were all being reported. But this all appeared to be falling on deaf ears, as nations and megacorporations doing business in China did not want to upset the Chinese government. It should be mentioned that shortly after the filming of this video, the US Congress passed legislation to ban imports of products made in East Turkestan. But this seems too little, too late, and not near enough to make the Chinese government second-guess their current course of action. I recently sat down with Irade Kashgary from the Uyghur American Association to discuss the situation in East Turkestan and the UAA's attempts to spread the word about it. And I know a lot of people remember back, it was a few years ago now, that these videos and these pictures were coming out of Uyghurs lined up in front of trains. Their heads are shaved. And honestly, I don't think many people really knew the situation of what was going on in East Turkestan before those images got smuggled out. So if you can, just to start us off, can you fill people in on the situation in East Turkestan, how that got started? I think more people are familiar with situations like Tibet and Hong Kong and things like that. So can you please start there for us?
Yeah, I could give a brief history, I guess, of how we got here and what's happening now. So East Turkestan, and I appreciate you using the name because there is a lot of conflict on the name usage as well. So East Turkestan was a established republic in northwest, what is now, I guess most people recognize as Northwest China, or the land Xinjiang. It was an established republic in 1933 and then again in 1944. And this has always been the land of the Uighur people. For up until recent years, the population has been, the majority has been Uyghurs. Then in 1949, when the Communist Party of China during Mao Zedong's era took over, there was actually a flight of Uyghur leaders that were going to meet with the Chinese Communist Party as well as the Soviet Union. And during that flight back to East Turkestan, the flight disappeared with 15 Uyghur leaders. And with their disappearances, China immediately moved into the region and took over East Turkestan and changed the name to Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Since then, Uyghurs have been treated as second-class citizens always. They've been treated as a minority of the country. So it goes under China's overall, we have 300 minorities kind of dialogue that they continue to say to this day. And to make sure that Uyghurs became a minority, they have been doing forced immigration since the 1950s to the Uyghur region. As in, if someone was in trouble in mainland China, they could get out of jail time or something if they moved and relocated to the Uyghur region. If they or there would be financial benefits that the government would give you money and give you a job, and if you move to the region. And then the other is that there is a paramilitary group that they moved in mass to the region as well to build roads and, restructure the whole region. And then at the same time, moving people out of their homes and forcing them into apartment buildings and destroying their homes and their lands to continue to make sure that there was no land ownership, right, under the moniker of communism and whatnot. And that's the kind of era that people grew up in. Uyghurs have been protesting on and off for years, for decades, really. And I'll go back to a little bit of my history. In 1997, my hometown had a huge protest, a peaceful protest. It's called the Gulja Massacre. This was one of the initial times where a lot of Uyghurs actually came out into the diaspora because they protested, and then the military groups came in and shut down all protesters. This continued to happen year after year. Then in 2001, when 9/11 happened in the United States, the Chinese Communist Party saw that leverage of using the term terrorism associated with the Muslim religion, and they saw, hey, maybe this will give us some sort of power over, the treatment that we can start implementing on the Uyghur region and the Uyghurs, because we're majority Muslim. And since then, you'll see a huge change in the Communist Party's definition of what's happening in the Uyghur region. Rather than talking about, Uyghurs wanting independence or more freedom or more human rights, and that's why we're protesting, they start calling these attacks of these protests terrorist attacks. They start rephrasing any actions that the Uyghurs are having by disagreeing with China's actions towards the Uyghurs in the region. They start calling it terrorism. 2001 passes, this terrorism dialogue continues to be pushed, this terrorism propaganda continues to be pushed by the Chinese Communist Party. And then in 2009, there's another bigger protest where Uyghurs again stand up, and they are trying to peacefully protest when military starts attacking them, and it turns quickly violent, and they call that another terrorist attack. And since then, they really uptake their policies in the region, especially when Xi Jinping comes into power. In 2014, it's actually recently leaked documents show that Xi Jinping was pushing for more aggressive policies and handling the Uyghur issue, as they call us, because we're a problem. And all the while, the region is continuously being, they're forcing assimilation upon the Uyghurs in the region, while also moving in Chinese people from the mainland continuously in. Then in 2014, when Xi Jinping says that they need to step up their policies and become a little bit more aggressive, this starts taking into action in 2016, when Uyghurs abroad then all of a sudden start seeing intellectuals, actors, actresses, leaders within our communities all starting to either disappear, or families completely losing touch, and things start to escalate really quickly. And then you start, having phone calls home where Uyghurs keep calling back home, and they're saying, oh, they're out, they're studying, they're doing this, they're out, something's happening, and they can't really explain what's going on. There's no actual explanation of what's happening. Every once in a while, someone will get a little bit of more information. What researchers start finding out during this time is that there's these prison-like camps being built throughout all the region. From 2016 to now, they are continuously growing and getting much larger to be able to hold up to 1 million, 2 million people. And at the same time, we're noticing family members disappearing. People are saying, oh, they're going to school. A 50-year-old doctor is going back to school, apparently. And that's when we start seeing leaks of documents of the concentration camps. And we actually have some survivors that come out through different avenues that escape, and they start giving their testimonies of what exactly is going on. And what is essentially happening is that it's beyond forced assimilation. It's genocide, really, because they have implemented not only torture tactics in these concentration camps, but they are forcefully sterilizing women. They are taking children away into orphanages because their parents are being put into these camps. And even if their parents aren't being put into camps, these kids are being pushed into these orphanages to study and recognize themselves as Chinese, not Uyghur. So yeah, that's the brief history, I guess.
It's
And
it's that is it's gut wrenching to listen to, because I think, especially living in America, we are kind of living in this isolated bubble,
mhm,
and it really feels that way, where we don't understand that there are these modern day genocides that are happening that really feel like 1930s 1940s Europe in a way. You have concentration camps where, I don't know if my numbers are accurate right now, and maybe you can correct me if they're not, but I've heard up to 1 million um, Uyghurs. Am I pronounce? I apologize for my pronunciation. I think I get a lot of that from mainstream media here, and we're just not used
mhm.
to hearing about your people. But 1 million people, that is, it's mind blowing, and I don't understand, how is this not on the front page of every newspaper, or nightly news, and we're not hearing about meetings that are occurring with uh, President Biden and Xi Jinping, which I knew happened recently, but I guarantee you there was probably no mention of the situation in East Turkestan, um, because of those trade relations and everything like that. So I'm very curious to know, how have people in organizations like the UAA, have there been any sort of outreach from big companies or countries that are really trying to put a spotlight on this, or are you just seeing quiet from everyone?
So there are, I don't want to discredit politicians and people in government that have, and larger organizations that have done a lot of work to try to get this issue raised continuously. I mean, we'll see even one of the most exciting milestones for the Uyghur people in America was that the Uyghurs were brought up during the 2020 elections, right? That this was an issue. And there's a couple of congressmen that have been continuously speaking out, but it's still not to the degree of something so atrocious. I continuously think about, if we're looking back onto what happened during the Holocaust and with Hitler, how would we have reacted at that point? And lo and behold, while history says that the United States stood up and fought, there are parts that we didn't do our part at the beginning. We didn't speak up as quick as we should have, and I feel like that's exactly what's happening right now. We're not speaking up. We're not acting, because at the end of the day, China is a huge trade partner.
Yeah.
The worst part is the international organizations. These international organizations that are supposed to be committed to helping civil societies and helping organizations like ours and helping the Uyghur people like the minorities and the Uyghur people. And I don't want to call Uyghurs the minority really within China, because technically in our land, it's, we are supposed to be the majority, but supposed to be helping small groups like ours and small nations like ours, and yet we're not seeing anything. Mainly because of the flow of money. We'll see, the World Bank has a history of actually sending money to China into doing these educational outreach programs in the Uyghur region. You'll see the United Nations staying completely silent at a high level. Those major groups might speak out, but you don't see Antonio Guterres saying anything regarding this. And I think it's extremely disappointing. And it just honestly shows how our human rights values have really been going downhill in the recent years as China's ideologies and China's power continues to grow globally.
Yeah, and what is sickening is we have so many companies that are so intertwined, doing their business there. I'd even heard stories. We'd seen pictures of people with their head shaved in front of these trains, and then I had heard stories that hair was being used,
Yep.
to make hair products, wigs or extensions or things like that. that just, it's sickening. And then you hear about there's slave labor, correct?
Mm,
That's being
yes.
used. And is this strictly the CCP coming in and taking people out and bringing them to places to do government sort of work and work on roads and things like that? Or are they actually assisting certain Chinese companies? Like, have you heard anything about what actually goes on during that process?
Yes, we have, and it is so everything that the way that the CCP works is while there's regional governments, the regional governments all report upwards, right? There's no when we compare it to the United States system where there is some sort of separation between federal and state, there is none of that. The state or the region reports directly to the CCP and takes directives from the overall Communist Party and the federal, I guess, overall government. And so, and these companies, they have to report to the CCP. Everything that they do is ownership is by the government. So what ends up happening is to help production and help the income that's coming into China overall, the Chinese government pushes these policies that will forcibly migrate Uyghurs into any factories that need employees at a low cost and low cost or no cost really. And that's what's exactly happening. There's these camps that have been essentially brainwashing and abusing Uyghurs, and then they'll use these camps to then move these people into factories away from their homes, or they'll continue to keep them in the region, but utilize those camps to also manufacture. So they'll become these slave labor factories as well as camps. So they're living and working and breathing in this strictly monitored area. And without, without pay. I think there was one person who reported they are receiving, pay enough for like 300 UN for a month or something like that. And it's painful to hear because they've been just relocated to somewhere else forcibly, and they can't see their families, they don't have any communication. And in a way, it's also pulling Uyghur people from the region that they're calling home, right? They're forcibly changing the whole demographic in the region as well.
So when you say that there are these new settlements of what I'm assuming is pretty much all Han Chinese moving into East Turkestan, correct? Now, when that occurs, you've said, there's financial incentives and stuff like that. Also, I'm assuming that those people probably have free movement a lot more than the Uyghur people, because from what I've heard, there's like a lot of travel restrictions placed on the Uyghurs, right?
So majority of Uyghurs don't have passports, and in all of their IDs, it's identified that they're Uyghur and that they're from the region. And so they aren't able to travel. There's police checkpoints at every corner. So you can't even travel from, one end of this small town to the end of another small town without at least going through multiple checkpoints and possibly being prevented from leaving. Uyghurs aren't able to leave their home. We're not able to communicate. We're not able to get out anymore. And versus, the Han Chinese or, other groups that are in the area, they're able to move around freely. As I mentioned, we're treated as, second class, not even second class citizens anymore. I think at one point you could say second class citizens, but at this point we're just not treated as human beings.
Yeah. And I had actually, I think a lot of people are familiar with underground churches in China that have to meet in private. And then there's, I've heard stories of raids on those underground churches and people being imprisoned and all of that stuff. Is there a similar sort of situation with you said the Uyghurs are majority Muslim population? Are there restrictions on religious events, being able to go to mosque, anything like that?
There is, and the restriction is that there can't be any, unless it's state sponsored and unless it's ran by the state, and it's government approved. So even the mosques, the imams, they've all been, imprisoned or put into camps or disappeared. And so the only imams that exist are the ones that the state has forcibly put in there for show, really, because at one point all mosques were shut down, but because at the end of the day, there were still people coming in to visit here and there, and they wanted to put up a showcase. So every time you hear that a certain leader, at one point, I think some of the CCP's closest allies, they had sent their leaders to visit East Turkistan, and the leaders were like, oh, everything's fine, there seems to be no problem. But unbeknownst to them, or known to them, but they will continue to ignore it, they are forced. They're shut down on a regular basis, and at the second there's some sort of public event, they try to normalize it by forcing people to go into these mosques. But other than that, most mosques have been destroyed. There's a continually destroying our mosques, and building up new Sinicized mosques in the name of, oh, we are equal and there is nothing happening here, but really these aren't, they're not legitimate, they're not being used by the community, they're not allowed to be. And on top of that, as much as I think Uyghurs would love to do underground and continue to pray, there's a fear that exists in them that doesn't allow that to happen, because the pressure that they've seen in the past 10 years is so intense that there's no way that they would ever try to waver from what the state wants them to do. They've been stamped out of any sort of hope that exists within them. So there are people that have been able to go back in 2018, 2019, and they've come out, and I've spoken to a few of them. And most recently, someone had gone in 2019 and said that it's not the same, because you walk down the street and everyone's just looking down. There's no interaction. The humanity in them, in their eyes, are gone. They're living in fear, in constant fear. And unfortunately, I think China's been very successful at implementing policies that have caused them to say, yeah, we have no option but to listen to what the Communist Party wants.
China really has become this giant surveillance state, and that's kind of scary. There seems to be not just surveillance of what you do on a daily basis, but also surveillance of what you do online. And they have this new social credit system that they're implementing to really control every action of their citizenry. And one of the things that I was curious about with you is, with the UAA, have you seen or heard any sort of communication directed towards organizations like yours from the CCP? Has there been any sort of threatening communications or gestures? I'm assuming you guys are. It's kind of sad in the wake, because just the fact that you are speaking out on this right now pretty much limits the fact that you're ever going to be able to go back to East Turkestan unless they achieve some sort of freedom or regional freedom. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll go back to your first point on the surveillance state aspect first, that within the region, they have complete control. They know exactly where you are at all times. You enter your house, they know. You leave your house, they know. Even within those homes, there have been reports that the CCP sends in these relatives, government-sponsored relatives, which are Han Chinese counterparts to Uyghurs, that they're saying, oh, this person is your cousin, or this is your relative, so they're going to come stay with you. And this is state sponsored. They'll come stay with you, and you get to know them, and you have to share. It gets very creepy, very strange, where these people are sleeping in your homes, and it's because they're monitoring what you're doing within your household. Zumrat Dawood, part of her testimony is about how she nearly had to let her 12-year-old daughter sleep with a 50-year-old state sent man, and it was heartbreaking to hear that. and just seeing that interaction, it was horrific. So those are the things that are happening within the region. Not to mention, throughout all of China, their phones are constantly monitored. There's no privacy whatsoever between you and the state. And it's easy to implement because, again, things come directly from one, it's a very direct order, and then everyone has to implement it. There's no laws to protect citizens' rights. There's nothing about privacy laws or anything like that. And so you're able to build these apps that are constantly collecting data, whether it's, your voice data, facial data. Not to mention there's facial scanning that's happening, and to the point that they're actually recognizing, hey, that person's facial structure doesn't look Han Chinese, they look Tibetan or they look Uighur. So they're recognizing your race through it and able to make certain decisions on, hey, don't let these people go to that town, or don't let them enter because we're recognizing their face as an Uighur.
Holy cow. So
that's happening internally. And the scary part, we were kind of touching into how much of a power China has become globally. They're able to scale it globally as well, to the point that they're, at the end of the day, they're a government with lots of money and lots of power. So they have the resources to continue to attack and monitor Uyghurs abroad. This being said, we've heard word of specific teams being built to monitor Uyghurs abroad. What are they doing? Have they spoken out? People have been contacted because they posted things while abroad in the United States against the Chinese Communist Party. They've been contacted to say, hey, stop doing that. Kids have been contacted by parents because a lot of students came out here within the last 10 years, and their parents are getting pressured back home for their kids' actions here. Beyond that, they're asking kids and relatives here to send their passports, their IDs, any sort of government identifying information. So if you have a US passport, you should be sending that back home so your parents can give it to the government. So this is all happening to citizens outside US citizens. So if you're a US citizen, they're still asking for your passport numbers. These are confidential, IDs and whatnot. If you're getting married, they want to know who you got married to. They want the identification of your partner, everything from there. Now, when it comes to what the people who are working in this field are risking, I have a lot of admiration to people who are constantly out day in and day out in front of this movement, because there have been attacks. There's actually some media that most likely are getting, some sort of incentive from the Communist Party to write hit pieces on Uyghur organization leaders. These are people who could be, working for private companies and making, 100, 200K, and yet they're taking half the cut pay just so that they can work on Uyghur issues and they can continue to press this. There's people working for free and, constantly committing extra time and energy to these issues on top of their day-to-day jobs that they need to, have a living. And they're writing hit pieces on these people, these Uyghurs, and they're saying that they're CIA, they're being paid by this government or that government to discredit China. And the whole time it's like, no, these are people who have everyday lives that could probably be living very normal, happy, healthy lives. And yet here they are spending 10 hours after, their 8-hour workday to put in effort to this and to spend time and have headaches and meetings, because a lot of them can't sleep because of what's happening, because it's their family members, it's their people. So yeah, there have been hit pieces. On top of that, Uyghur websites, I think Apple released a report that said that a couple of Uyghur websites had been attacked and targeted by a certain virus and whatnot. So there's definitely efforts in trying to not only monitor Uyghurs abroad, but to harm them and threaten them. Some of the testimony, some of the camp survivors have reported, that they have fear of being watched. And yeah, there's a lot.
It's I can't even imagine. And right now, you actually see that on a daily basis. If you pay attention to what's going on, we've had people, John Cena, famous wrestler and actor, and he was out there apologizing for saying that Taiwan was independent. China is exerting all of this power and influence. The Olympic Games, is the same way with that. Taiwan is forced to be called Chinese Taipei. They are, completely, and I would love to speak with somebody from the Hong Kong movement as well, because with that, they're completely ignoring agreements for Hong Kong to remain autonomous for X amount of years, and exerting a lot of pressure on these political leaders, some of which disappear. And it's scary that this nation that is basically ruling over, almost a sixth of the world's population is doing this to its own, not just its own people, but to others that are under its control right now. And it's extremely scary. One of the saddest things that I had heard, you mentioned the forced sterilization, but I'd also heard about forced abortion. And I can't even imagine the pain of that, being a father of 3 little girls myself, to have a baby that you're expecting and that you would want to keep, and the government is coming in and saying, no, you can't keep that, is terrifying and heartbreaking at the same time. So one of the things that I'm curious about is, how do you think we move forward from here? How do we progress outreach and really step up that game? Because sadly, things like the Free Tibet movement didn't seem to go anywhere, and that was huge decades ago. And then it died out and it died out and it died out. And now you see a bumper sticker occasionally. So how can we get in front of the right people's faces and say, okay, we need to do something about this now. There's concentration camps now. There's forced labor, and there's forced sterilization, and there's all of these awful things occurring right now. You need to exert pressure on the CCP and make an actual difference. How do we do that now?
Man, I think there's multiple parts to it. One part, we'll talk about public figures. You briefly mentioned how the Free Tibet movement didn't see the success that they were seeing 20 years ago. And we work closely with Tibetans, and we work closely with Hong Kongers, because at the end of the day, unity is really where we're going to see success, right? We all have one goal, and that's for freedom and autonomy, and to have some sort of, say in what's happening to us. And I think from public figures, it's that our public figures that we rely so heavily on when it comes to U.S. politics, or when we're thinking about women's rights, or when we're thinking about what's happening in the Middle East, or any of these global issues that our leaders have spoken about, or national issues that some of our public figures have spoken out, specifically celebrities, and they fail to do that when it comes to China. It points to one very clear angle, right? When you look at the Tibet movement, Richard Gere was a huge proponent of it, and he was ousted by Hollywood, essentially. And they weren't able to hire him anymore because they want to sell movies to China. There's a really funny piece that South Park essentially calls out on this whole thing with Hollywood, where Hollywood sales are China is a huge part of Hollywood sales, and Hollywood will continuously try to get into China's market, because that's a billion plus people, and that's huge. And so it's one kind of holding Hollywood responsible and holding our public figures responsible to say, hey, I get it, you're making money from this angle, but we're not going to take you seriously on any other issue that you're speaking about unless you're able to speak out against something that's actually going to impact you. You know, some of the people that run movements are giving up really, really wealthy, safe lives because they want to be part of the movements, whether, you know, throughout all different issues that are happening in this world. And Hollywood can't just be like, oh, yes, we care when it's an issue that's going to give us some sort of public fame, but it's going to not affect our revenue. And then all of a sudden they can stay completely silent when it does affect their revenue, just even a little bit, right? There needs to be some sort of character, some sort of principle that needs to exist there that doesn't. And I think we need to start holding them accountable. You know, we talk about cancel culture all this time, and we can't cancel people for the most egregious stuff, for failing to speak about the most egregious stuff. I think that's ridiculous. And you know, like I think we need to uphold our celebrities that do want to speak out, that and whatnot. The other aspect is companies, right? Companies that are running, that are benefiting from forced labor, that are benefiting from this genocide. That versus the companies that aren't necessarily directly benefiting from it, but are benefiting from positive relationship between the US and China, and China in general. One is the forced labor. Most of these are fashion companies. We're talking Zara, Victoria's Secret. We're talking H&M tried to speak out at one point, right? They said that they were no longer going to get their cotton from China, and the Chinese people spoke out. Granted, it was partially CCP pressured, but people started speaking out against H&M because the H&M said, "Oh, we're no longer going to get our cotton from." Because of the forced labor issues. Just by saying something like that, a company is being ousted. So then H&M, what do? They back up on their statement and remove the whole statement from their website. So it's holding companies accountable too, trying to look out. And I think when it comes to fashion, there are ways to do that. I recommend everybody trying to continuously boycott made in China goods and try to get something made elsewhere, because at the end of the day, you know, that is going to be a huge proponent of how the government acts, how the US government acts. If companies see that their sales are going down because they're continuously using made in China products, or they're creating their products in China, they are going to have to respond to that. As for companies that aren't maybe directly benefiting, but want to continue to build good relationships, I'm talking to you, Apple, you know, Google, all these big tech companies that are at the end of the day building this relationship because of data, right? Data is a huge proponent of this, the data information that China just is able to gather, because you go visit China and they'll know your whole background, from your social media to every private detail of your life. And they're able to contain that data. And the second Apple gets access to that, you know, they're able to grow their company a little bit more. On top of that, these companies are also building relationships with China to put our data at risk abroad. If you're going to keep your, you know, data in servers within China, China is not going to see that as a, oh, that's your servers, let me give you your privacy. No, they're not going to respect that privacy. They're going to be able to access all of that. And I think that's a huge issue. And so making sure that we're, you know, really moving away from any kind of relationship with the Communist Party until they change their policies. And even if they change their policies, until we can ensure that they're keeping word, right? Because like you said with Hong Kong, they're not following these treaties. They're not following these agreements that are being made. So what's to say that they're going to follow it if, you know, so company is like, hey, we, you know, like to have this business relationship, but we need to draw these lines. They're probably not. Nike came out saying, oh, we did an audit of our products to make sure that we're not using any forced labor, but they used an auditing company that's based within China to do the audit of their companies. So the company has to still, at the end of the day, the audit company still has to report to the Chinese government. So now you're seeing a company that's being monitored by the Chinese government say, oh, no, we're not using force. You're not using forced labor. So it's this very messed up, interconnected thing that we need to recognize, that nothing is happening within China that the CCP is not being involved in one way or another.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that we need to, one of the biggest things we could do, and it's sad because you pick up any product in your home and half of it's going to say made in China underneath it. And I think we have to get back to not just us as a nation, but other countries around the world, and rebuilding those manufacturing industries that we had here. It's kind of scary noting that China is now one of our primary producers of antibiotics for the U.S. That in itself makes it seem like politicians, especially, aren't going to say much because they know there's these tethers that are tying us on to China at this time. And we have to rebuild our society in a way that we can cut those tethers and not worry about any repercussion, from that.
100%.
What is just mind blowing to me is the silence from key nations in the area that are seeing this going on right now. I would expect, and I know China has ties with countries like Iran, so they're probably not going to speak up as much, but there's not really anything that I've seen from just doing research from other Muslim majority countries that are saying anything about this now. And you would think you would see some sort of response from one of those countries, but it's mind blowing to me. So can you talk a little bit about the UAA and some of your outreach efforts that you're doing with the Uyghur American Association? And I know you have some programs targeted for schools, correct?
Yes. So those are two separate things. My work with the UAA is, so the UAA is Uyghur American Association. Our work is primarily based on supporting the Uyghur population in America and trying to, help them in any way, shape, or form, and also build a community bond here and celebrate our culture, which is something that we unfortunately can't do back home. So, we host events and opportunities for our community members and to help with any asylum issues or any ways that they might need support. We try to help fulfill. That being said, another huge part of our work is outreach and trying to make sure that people are constantly in the know of what's happening and are updated on exactly how bad the situation is getting. This also includes partially, reaching out to government officials and leaders. So one of the things that you mentioned about, political leaders and whatnot, right now, particularly, and the silence of political leaders and how political leaders are really involved in this money-making machine between China and how our items are made. There is currently in Congress a bill, the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, that we are trying really hard to pass as UAA. That's our, one of our biggest goals right now is to make sure that that gets through. The Forced Labor Prevention Act would essentially would ban products from the Uyghur region coming into the U.S. And while we've seen it pass the Senate, there is a huge stop on it on the House because of technicalities. And I think that's very heart-wrenching. And I don't want to get, because all this issue is completely, bipartisan. There shouldn't be any party relations or anything like that. But there's always that fear that might be impacting it. And so pushing our political leaders, pushing our congressmen and women to continue to support this bill no matter what, because it's not about what's happening within the United States, right? We might see a little bit of financial impact, but the amount of financial impact we'll see now is so minuscule compared to what we're actually signing up for if we continue to let this happen.
right. You're
If we
talking about
continue.
the possible slow annihilation of a people if they continue to sterilize and continue to do forced abortions and continue to move in Han Chinese into East Turkestan to replace the people. It's
Yeah,
amazingly sad.
and like the forced annihilation part is a heartbreaking part, but the most frightening part is what that starts, right? We allow a government to do that without any responsibility. We continue to profit from that. What does that mean for our country? What does that mean for our global world? What does that mean for our values and what happens to human rights next? If we allow the CCP to get away with things like this and continue to have positive relations and continue to pressure us to stay silent, what other influences can they have on us? What happens when they start attacking our people, which they have already? I'm a US citizen and I've gotten threats. I've have to be extremely careful. I've had my phone hacked, I've had my emails hacked. Those things have happened to me, and as a US citizen. So if we continue to bow our heads to the CCP and continue to turn our heads to their actions now, then we're signaling to them, hey, we're going to continue to do this. This is something you could probably walk over us a little bit more, and time goes on. Before we know it, we're no longer able to even stand up and say, hey, like, you guys are crossing the line here when it comes to, US-China relations. They've already, and I don't want to get into domestic, and US-China relations too much, but I genuinely think that if we don't stand up on the Uyghur issue here, then it's going to affect China's relationship as a leader within the global community.
Absolutely. And I think their position within the UN kind of puts a lot of pressure against other countries that would want to say something to them, because they were given that, not just that, but World Trade Organization recognitions and things like that, that, are questionable, that they would be given those statuses. But they've recently made some even more questionable moves that should show people a little bit of the aim. I'm thinking about, I don't know if you know about the story of what happened with the African Union, and the Chinese government basically came in and said, hey, we know the African Union needs this great new complex and we'll do it for you guys, all on us, don't worry about it. And then some smart tech people in this newly constructed, really nice facility noticed that nightly they were sending information back to Shanghai. And I was like, hey, what's going on? Why is all of our information being sent over there? They found bugs all over the place. We were talking about that surveillance state. It's not just internally. They are trying to spy on nations around the world to gain some sort of edge globally. We know that they want to be a superpower, like the US. And it's really kind of nerve-wracking because of the large amounts of money they've spent putting in building this massive navy and all of these other assets that they've gotten going around the world. But hopefully, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say that brings up the Belt and Road Initiative too. That the money that they're putting towards an initiative like that, the way that they're investing in all these Muslim majority countries, for example, the money that they're investing there, that's done with intention. They're not doing it because of the good that they'd be doing, because at the end of the day, it still brings back money into them. They're finding another way to colonize. They're finding another way, I call it modern colonization, because you can't just, these days, like they did to East Turkistan, you can't just bring your public leaders and then, just take over a whole, portion of land. But what you can do is you can slowly debt trap them, right? And put them in debt, make sure that they owe you, make sure that make sure that the people who are going to work with you are put into these government leadership positions. And that's what they've essentially done. They forced countries like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, because of their economic ties, to kowtow to them. and to stay silent about this issue. And I think countries that are currently able to speak out need to realize that that's the trajectory we're heading to. I think companies in these countries need to realize that that's the direction we're heading to if we don't we don't stop it soon.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for your time and everything that you're doing and continue to do. If people want to go and actually help the UAA, or they want to do something with this issue to start helping spread the word, where can they go? What resources can they go look up to get in contact with you guys or organizations like you to get involved?
Yeah, there's quite a few organizations these days, but Uyghur American Association, our website's uiguraa.org, will help you build that connection with either the community or different orgs that are doing Uyghur work in different angles. So you can, uiguraa.org is the website name, and yeah, you can go on to that and find any information and contact information, and we'd be more than happy to direct you to the right organization to work with. The number one thing that people can do as an action item right now is to call your congressperson, call them and either set up a meeting or just tell them, hey, there's this bill and we need to get it passed ASAP. So please support it. It's the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. We need as much support, and right now it's getting stuck in the House. So we really, really need to get it flowing through there. And so as many people call, your congressmen and women will listen to you, as long as you continue to push in mass. Then the other thing, if you want to learn about Uyghur culture, if you want to learn the Uyghur language, I also run a school called Karen Education, and we teach young people, but we're opening adult classes too on the Uyghur history and Uyghur language. So highly recommend that as well. It's a community building effort. And so, yeah, I think I would recommend those 3 action items.
Awesome. Well, hey, I really, really appreciate your time. And we are going to do our best to try to help spread this and spread knowledge of it. I wish you the best of luck in everything you do. And if there are any updates on the bill or anything else that you would like to come back and talk about, I would be more than happy to have you back. So thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.